All right, hello, I am here. It is me. I waited a second or two there because I actually was curious about that commercial that was playing. I thought it was pretty cool. I don't remember that. Certainly can imagine the appeal of a freedom stick. All right, let me cut the music so you can hear me hopefully well enough. Good afternoon, welcome back. So this is the second half of, not half because this won't be as long, the second phase of today's class as we continue with games and culture and essentially trying to accomplish a week's worth of concepts and learning every day. And this is today. I'm looking a little pinkish still and sort of weirdly luminous, but that's okay. I don't know. Let me just try a couple of us. I look weirdly saturated. I want to see if I can pull that down. Okay, that's better, but now my chroma key's messed up. Let me try this. There we go. That's better, I guess. I don't know. It doesn't matter. All right. Hi, everyone. So, hi, Ryan. Hi, Lassie. So this is the second part, and I wanted to separate this out from the morning's lecture because this is really a separate topic and really gets into the heart of video game studies as a discipline or field. And I'm not sure actually what the difference is between a discipline and a field, but people who study video games in serious ways, they refer to themselves in different ways. And so this is, I wanted to talk a little bit about a particular conversation that really came to define the early days of video game studies, and it is the supposed debate between 2 points of view represented by these two names here, ludology and narratology. As usual with these lectures, I'm kind of just going to skim the surface. I really want to kind of give you some signposts to help you navigate this and understand this as you start seeing references to it in some of the other reading. Specifically, I'd like for you to learn a bit more about it today by going a bit deeper into 2 points of view, to writers expressing points of view from these two sides, to really kind of understand the nuances of these. But I thought it would help if I gave you a quick overview of these 2 points of view, and maybe I can situate it historically a little bit, although I don't know if my slides are going to do a great job of that, honestly. So yeah, this is it, ludology and narratology. I shared the slides in Discord, so you can look at those on your own if you want to, and I'm actually going to pull them up here. Hold on a second. I'm going to pull them up on my other screen so that I can look both ways as I remember which slide is which. So yeah. Okay, good. Okay, here we go. So ludology, narratology. Which browser am I in? There it is. Okay. So when we look at and we think of the field of video game studies, it's tempting to look back at the early days, especially of video game studies, like the early 2000s, and think of it as a kind of kingdom divided into 2 regions, or maybe a continent divided into 2 nations, or something like that. This is a fantasy map generated by the Twitter bot Uncharted Atlas, and this is totally, it is. It's a whole world. Except it isn't. So like that's the thing that I'm going to get to. But I thought I'd show you this because it's one of my favorite Twitter bots of I have many, but this one is, hopefully this is the right link. I'm just checking to make sure it is, but this is, yes it is. Okay, just double checking. A guy named Martin O'Leary, I believe in his day job, he does GIS and cartography kind of stuff, and so he created some code that can generate very believable looking fantasy landscapes, and I just thought it would be a good way to kind of symbolize the sense of ludology and narratology as kind of a turf battle, without actually invoking any real world geopolitical conflict. So it's not like North Korea, South Korea. I don't want to associate, either side of this debate with a particular, actual geopolitical entity. But anyway, I just wanted to explain where I got this map from that I used. Really what you find is that these are ludology and narratology. If in fact they are separate kingdoms, they are really just subregions of entire other continents that are, connected in lots of ways. It's really a kind of a weak metaphor, honestly, but just wanted to think of this in terms of what's at stake here, maybe. I definitely recall some of the debates and some of the arguments that you'll see between these 2 points of view have to do with turf, as though like this is our kingdom and you're invading it with your narratological ideas, or vice versa. And there is a sense of competition basically between those two. So I guess the image here isn't entirely inaccurate, but it's also ultimately, I think, a contrivance. Like I think the basic conflict was, and still is to some extent, to whatever extent the conflict still exists, kind of arbitrary. But this is the 2 sides: ludology on the one side and narratology on the other side. So let's break these terms down a little bit, and we will break them down a little bit more, but let's just to start with ology. Of course, when we add ology to something, that usually means we're studying it. So, geology is the study of the earth, because you take geo and then you add ology to it. I don't know, can you think of others? Theology, the study of God, I guess, right? So is theo God? I guess it is. Or I guess no, what would theo be? Because I guess it would be. I don't know. You know what I'm talking about. This is not that unusual. All right. Ology means we're studying it. So when we talk about narratology, we're talking about studying narrative or storytelling. When we talk about ludology, we're talking, you would think, about the study of play. And if you remember from the lecture this morning, Roger Caillois gave us that terminology of ludus versus paideia. So this is the ludus. Like that's the lud of ludology. That's what Roger Caillois is talking about, and that's what people who use the term ludology are picking up on and using as the ology to describe the thing that they're doing when they study video games. So when I talk about the early days of this debate, by the way, this is really the early 2000s, and we can actually see this played out. You can kind of replay this whole debate if you want. The journal Game Studies, gamestudies.org is the website. The International Journal of Computer Game Research was the first academic journal solely focused on studying video games. People had been publishing articles about video games in other journals, like I remember in the journal Postmodern Culture. I remember reading things there, for example, but Game Studies as a journal was founded solely to serve the field of video game studies. It was the first. It's not the only one. There are several others now. There's one called Games and Culture. There's eLudimos. There's Loading is another one. What's another one? There's there's probably a dozen or so at this point. But Game Studies is still kind of the flagship and still the one that people try to get published in. And if you go back in time, you can actually sort of go all the way back to 2001 and see some early position statements in the battle of ludology versus narratology, and you can actually see this journal, this particular issue actually plays it out pretty well. You can actually see even just by skimming the titles and the abstracts here, kind of what these people are positioning against each other. So I've asked you to read something by Espen Arseth and by Marie-Laure Ryan here. Jesper Juul's another figure who who shows up a lot, I guess. Jesper Juul ends up kind of staking a compromise position between the two with his book called Half Real. I think Ian Bogost's procedural rhetoric, which I talked about last week, is another kind of halfway point between ludology and narratology. But you got some people in here like Espen Arseth, like Marco Eskelinen, who are, and like Gonzalo Frasco, who are pretty hardcore ludologists. Marco Eskelinen's work in particularly is really, really strident in its tone and its dismissiveness when he talks about people who are trying to use narrative tools to talk about video games. Marco Eskelinen has no time for them and is very, I would say, rude to them in his writing. So I don't assign his work, but I think it's worth looking at different points of view. Anyway, that's just a bit of an aside, but GameStudies.org is still an excellent resource, and really, I've assigned you all a couple of things from there already. So that's what we're talking about, narratology, ludology. So when it comes to the kinds of things that people are doing when they are doing either of these, this is a bit of a caricature of both sides, but I'm oversimplifying for the point of brevity and kind of keeping things simple here. But when we're doing ludology, we might be more interested in rules, goals, processes, mechanics, things like game design. We're interested in the syntagmatic aspects of the game, in other words, how it hangs together as an experience. And these are things that we've already talked about a little bit. When we talked about like that breakdown in terms of rules, mechanics, and goals, I got that from Katie Salen and Eric Zimmerman, and they're very much coming out of that kind of camp. They're coming at it from a methodological standpoint where they're trying to do game design and teach people how to do game design. And that's really what this side is going to be more useful for in some ways, the ludology point of view. So then the narratologists, on the other hand, are going to be more interested in things like characters and choices and consequences and plot and atmosphere and things like paradigm. Like, what did you choose to put in this level? Like, what kind of hat is this person wearing? Things that ludologists would think of as a skin for a game. These are the things that the narratologist might start with, and these are I don't know. These are the terms that we're using. So a ludologist might say something like a video game is an experiential simulation or a procedural system. Narratologists might say that video games are a new form of interactive storytelling or a novel medium for communicating ideas. I think any one person could say things from both sides of this slide, and many people do. But what I'm trying to show you are the oppositions between these two sides, because indeed, that's how it often was presented. It was often presented as a zero-sum conflict between the two, or at least to the extent that ludologists saw themselves as kind of looking at the primary, the essential elements of a game, and in their view, the narratologists were looking at just the decoration or something like that. In fact, when we were talking about, recall last week, maybe it was the first week, we were talking about Portal a little bit, and we had a conversation in Discord about, does Chell matter? When we look at, for those of you who know Portal, you play the gameplay, the game mechanics have to do with shooting holes in walls, and then you go through the hole, and then you shoot two holes in two different walls. You go in one hole and you come out the other. Pretty abstract, pretty interesting, kind of novel platform puzzle solving. So someone, I think it was Colin in the chat, made a comment to the effect that it doesn't really matter who you play as. that Chell, who is the name of the player character, might as well be anybody, might as well be a machine, might as well be anything else. And I disagree with that, but I think it's a statement that is consistent with the ludological approach to video games. I mean, that's an example of it. And I think it does matter. I think the game mechanics are fascinating in Portal, but I think the storytelling is really what gets me there, because it's such minimalist, ambiguous. Like, the story is so ambiguous and minimal that you can read so much into it. It becomes a fascinating text to study. I mean, that's kind of my take, but that's my narratological take on it. Basically, what we find are that we often find ourselves in discussions about video games where we're not on the same page with someone else. We're putting priority on different kinds of things, and that leads us to be talking at cross purposes sometimes. I think so too, Scott. I mean, that's my take, but that's the kind of thing that exists at the narrative level, right? It doesn't exist. It's not essential, you might say, to the blue and the orange holes that you shoot into the walls, right? I mean, that's the ludological point of view, if I were to be the devil's advocate on that one. But hopefully you see that both might be relevant, right? I mean, in some games, the mechanics might be more interesting. You might want to focus on those. In some games, the narrative might be more interesting. You might want to focus on those. But I personally don't think you would ever be able to say that only the mechanics ever matter or only the story ever matters, right? It's a continuum, right, between these two. Okay. Another thing, and these are really kind of straw man arguments or positions that I'm putting out here on both sides. I don't know if I'm not quoting anyone specific here, but a ludologist might look at Super Mario Brothers and say that it's in describing the game, that the player must jump on platforms and avoid failure, which is here symbolized as falling in holes or dying for other reasons. And I put dying in quote marks there because there's no narratively significant death. It's just death is just a placeholder for failure, and it just says try again. Essentially, it doesn't mean you died in any consequential sense. It just means try again. Put in another quarter if you're playing in an arcade game. A narratologist, though, might say that it's a way of playing out the damsel in distress trope by occupying the position of the masculine savior who rescues the feminine character who is a subject, in this case not an agent. Like, she's there to be rescued, not there to solve any problems herself, but rather to be property, to be an object that is acquired and fought over by the male characters, Bowser and Mario. I mean, that's the narratological framework. Again, that's using the language of narrative to try to understand Super Mario Bros., which is hopefully a game you're familiar with. Okay, moving on. There's a lot of running upstairs. I don't know what's happening. To me, I think a lot of the issues and a lot of the things that we're talking about here really come down to this part of what we're talking about here. The idea of this being a versus, like the idea that this is an opposition of two competing viewpoints that exist at the exclusion of the other. And this big versus here, I think, ultimately is the real problem. It does, however, serve a purpose disciplinarily. If you think back to the 2000s, the early 2000s, people talking about this, arguing either side of that. That argument is a paper, you publish it in a journal, or you present it at a conference, you put it on your CV, and it helps you advance academically. So just by kind of existing as a debate, even if the debate was to some extent contrived, it still provided grist for the academic mill of people kind of getting started in their careers and trying to move into a place where we could talk about video games. I think the field moved on, but I think it did serve a purpose to help solidify the field really around this debate. And I think that's okay. But that ended up being a kind of game-like structure in itself. Because really, I think when a lot of times when someone calls what they're doing ludology or calls what they're doing narratology, the opposite of whatever they're doing, the other of what they're doing, is never in fact what we saw in that previous slide. It's never quite these two things butting heads. In fact, I think they're usually creating themselves as an opposite to something else. And I have another slide for that, but I wanted to see. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes death does matter. And I think that's a lot of times you see, I have kind of a pet theory, not a side note, but if you think about a lot of the art games from like the mid-aughts and late-aughts, things like Passage, a lot of times they deal with death I think because of the way that games had up until then so thoroughly trivialized death as simply a mechanical operation, just a consequence to tell you to start over again. And there's a whole bunch of memento mori kind of games like Passage. What's that other one? Every Day the Same Dream is another one. One Chance is another one. I think it's One Chance, or is it Last Chance? But I think it's One Chance. Yeah, so there are several games that sort of surprise you by making death matter, and that's what's interesting about them from an artistic standpoint. So yeah, death is interesting. So, and even like calling it death, that's a narrativized explanation of failure, right? So failure is what's being accomplished mechanically in terms of the game's mechanics, but death is what's being accomplished narratively in terms of the story of the game. So those are different, two different levels to talk about that. And this idea of having different levels, I think that's a way that we tend to think about this, which is to say both ludology and narratology are really two different kinds of formalism. Like these are two different approaches to formalizing the game. And so maybe one way out of this debate is to get away from formalism. I think that's another thing. Hades, yeah. I've heard a lot. I see people referring to Hades a lot. I think check that out. I think it's a roguelike. Okay, well, back to my slide here. What I was trying to get at, and feel free to keep chatting in Discord, but I'm gonna take a break from looking at it. Sorry, I'm able to look. You only live once, yeah. Okay, I don't know that one. Do you have a link to that one? I was thinking, because like forcing you to not replay a game is interesting when there are certain games that force you to like prevent you from replaying it. And One Chance is one I was thinking of. It's a Flash game, so there is a way around it, but unless you do a pretty detailed kind of workaround to it, it's going to prevent you from replaying. Okay, yeah, if you find a link to it, let me know. It might be the same. We might be thinking of the same game, actually, Scott, but maybe not. I'll look for it. I'll look for the one I'm thinking of later and share it if I can think of it. Looks like Anna's typing. So anyway, let me finish this thought here on this slide, and then I'll come back to Discord if there's any other discussion. So I think that whenever ludologists are dismissing an opposite point of view, whenever they're creating an opposite point of view, I think there's a bit of a straw man going on. I think, in fact, really ludologists are contrasting themselves with narrativists, or people overemphasizing narrative, whereas narratologists are really opposing themselves to simulationists. And I think these are just, it does seem like semantics, and it is, but the point is really a question of emphasis. It's not that someone is firmly in one camp or the other. It's just what are they choosing to emphasize in a particular analysis. And then ultimately the question is, what work does that analysis do? Like, what does it help us understand or know about a game that we wouldn't have realized unless we had approached it that way? And what we call that approach may not ultimately matter, but that's kind of up to you. Okay, so let me kind of break into narratology a little bit. So narratology is it's an academic discipline on its own, really. I mean, it's something that existed and kind of got rolling in the early 20th century and really took off in the mid 20th century. Fairly popular as a formal way to approach narrative, especially in light of proliferating narrative types like different media, like film, comics, and TV. These are different contexts in which we encounter storytelling and we understand it. I mean, it seems to be the same kind of thing, and that's ultimately the premise of narratology, is that that narrative is a transmedial phenomenon, which means that whenever we encounter a story on a TV show or a story in a comic book or a story in someone telling us a story, we can recognize that as being different forms of the same kind of thing. You could certainly say that the movie of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix is telling the same story as the book. I think that it would be more accurate to say that they are both telling stories that reference some of the same ideas, but I think they are very different stories ultimately. part of those differences have to do with the medium, but that's kind of getting down into media studies. Narratology tends to sit above media studies and think of like what is just the raw stuff of what we're doing, and if we look at it in terms of the constituent parts that we can break it down into, we can find those constituent parts in different media, not just film, not just novels, not just comics, or oral storytelling, but all of those in slightly different nuances, but the basics are still there. And one of the key distinctions that many narratologists start with is something like this, that we can talk about the difference between a story and discourse. And it tends to be graphed that way, like a story on top, discourse on the bottom. I couldn't figure out in Google Slides, by the way, how to like take away some of these lines. I really just wanted that middle, the horizontal line in the middle, and I couldn't figure out how to get Google Slides to format it that way. But the story is the raw material of the story, the what happened, the sequence of events, the places, the characters, the actual stuff of the story. And then the discourse level is the telling of the story. This is what parts I choose to tell first, the different parts I choose to emphasize, the different images that I'm including in it, and it's the medium part of it, the part of it that where I've chosen a medium like film or comic, and or literature or prose, whatever. And that's what I'm doing. When I do make those choices, I'm operating at the discourse level. I'm waiting for someone to stop stomping above me. I don't know what they're doing, but I'll go find out later. So these terms, by the way, and I just added this here, a major influence in this is Vladimir Propp, and his terms fabula and sujet essentially translate to story and discourse as used in this field. But like, I'm by the way, my terminology I'm using for this story and discourse, I'm specifically thinking of Seymour Chapman's terminology. Gerard Genette used similar terminology, but Vladimir Propp's fabula and sujet is the kind of archetype that other people were following as they thought about this, and there's actually many more nuanced ways to break this down, but most people that talk about narrative in a formal way have a similar kind of organization where there's some sense of like what is the stuff that I'm talking about, and then there's some sense of how is that stuff put together, and those are two different questions for many people. This is just an example of that to help illustrate it. If we think of story and discourse as two different levels, we can think of each of those levels having different components like time or space. But looking at time, I think, is a bit more intuitive. So if we think of story time as the sequence and duration of the story's events, so that's moving, left to right. Yeah, I'm making sure I'm not mirrored. That means we move events, along a path. Effects follow causes, and time progresses as it progresses. Story time is not just the sequence but the duration, so we might tell the story of someone's life, and that might be a story that has events that are decades apart, or we might tell a story of Europe and it might be centuries long, but the idea is that that's story time when we talk about it that way. Discourse time is the order of the events as I choose to tell them, and also how long it takes me to tell them. So if I tell you the story of Europe in 10 minutes, that's the discourse time, and that's not how long Europe has existed, that's how long I've told you the story of Europe. And these are two different things, and I think I think we recognize intuitively, but I think having this formal language helps understand how granular you can get if you're analyzing narrative in a formal way. So just as an example of thinking of these, if we think of story time as progressing logically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a series of events, that's how it would happen in story time. It's pretty easy to imagine a situation where we might tell those events in a different order. So the event that was number 5 in the original order is actually first in the discourse order. If you're following along, can you imagine, or can you think of what that would be like if I were telling a story in this order? So what would be a story kind of storytelling where I started with the last event? Again, it's typing. So what is it called when we start with the most recent event? I see some typing. Yes, yeah, Anna's got it. Yeah, so it's that's what I had in mind anyway. Yeah, flashback. So lots of movies do this, right? You start at the end essentially, and yeah, then it goes and 24 hours earlier, yeah, things like that. Exactly. Flashbacks, flash forwards also exist. There can be really complicated sequences in the discourse of storytelling that don't seem that complicated or confusing if it's done using the conventions of a medium. Some cheesy ones are like in a like film. You could imagine someone telling a story to someone else in the film, and then they say, "Back then, back when I was a small lad," and then there's sort of like a doodly fade out, and then things look sort of sepia, and they go through different events, and that's a flashback. That's something that happened. Yeah, the record scratch. Yeah, exactly. These are things that record scratch. I bet you're wondering how I got here, and then it goes back in time. So these are ways in which discourse time can move in both directions very easily, but it's not making a claim about time travel. Like, we're not talking about, unless it's some kind of science fiction thing, we're not talking about time travel. We're talking about storytelling timing and storytelling, telling things in different orders. So yeah, that's the back and forth. A technical word for this, yes, I'm going to write it here in Discord. A technical word for this kind of back and forth at the discourse level is analepsis. And so narratologists have all kinds of hyper-specific technical words for these constitutive elements of storytelling, and analepsis is one of those. So another one is, and this gets out of this particular thing, but I don't have a slide for this, but another one of this is whenever you break the fourth wall. Whenever you think of something as extending outside of the diegesis of a story into our frame of reference beyond the supposed walls of the medium, that's called breaking the fourth wall, and that's another special term in narratology. I'll type this here in Discord too. It is metalepsis for breaking. I feel like there's like a wrestling match going on above me right now. So I don't know if you can pick that up on the mic, but it's kind of distracting to me. Yeah. Anyway, and now they stopped. Yeah, they just got they grandparents came by yesterday and dropped off some stuff and some Christmas presents, including they each got their own Baby Yoda, right? Their own Grogu, and they're identical. Like, they are 4 identical Grogus, but they're all like fighting over them. They're like, no, that's mine, or that's mine. This one has, they look identical. You can't tell them apart, but they're like getting mad that someone touched their Grogu or did something with their Grogu. But it's like, how do you know that's yours? Like, yeah, and they're cute. I mean, they're they're super squishy. I mean, they're cute little things, but analepsis can go both directions. Yeah, good question, Anna. So analepsis would be, actually, you know what? I think there is another word for a flash forward, come to think of it. I might have to look that up. But usually analepsis just means getting out of the time stream into its own, so we're looking either forward or back, like we're breaking that sequencing. I feel like there's another term, though, like protolepsis or something. That's probably wrong. But usually we just use it generically to mean going either way. Yeah, so these are examples, and you could do a whole class on narratology. In fact, I teach one sometimes, but it's something that I just want to illustrate how narratology is its own thing above and beyond video games. And really, what narratologists are doing when people kind of ground themselves in narratology and they try to study video games is they're trying to come up with new kind of fancy words to describe the new kinds of storytelling things that video games can do, like showing you consequences of your actions. In fact, I don't have an assigned reading for this, but Espen Arseth, who kind of became the flag bearer for Ludology, wrote a really influential narratological text in the 90s where he talked about and defined ergodic literature. So he talked about the kind of literature where a reader or the experiencer has to do work in order to accomplish the text. That's a different kind of thing. And he, broke down a nuanced typology of ergodic literature. Yeah, good idea, Meg. I think we should definitely label them somehow, or give them like different earrings or something. Um, these are good ideas. All right. Anyway, I think things are breaking down. I need to move to the end here. So here's your homework, or your now work, or your on your own work. I want you to take a look at these two things. We've got an essay called Genre Trouble by Espen Arseth, and he does mean something fairly specific by the term genre, which you'll see. And then another piece called Computer Games as Narrative. Is that what? Wait, is that? That might be the right title. And that is by Marie-Laure Ryan. Both, I believe, are still the co-editors of Game Studies, the journal, but occupying two different points of view. So I still need to clean up the structure of this module, so please bear with me as I continue to do that. Here we are. I updated that with links. Did I not? Oh, I think I forgot to hit save. Hang on. Multiple windows here. And Kelly, you shouldn't worry about it. It'll be fine. I can say a few words in a minute. Let me just make sure I've got the right links here. Okay, good. So this is the essay by Espen Arseth called Genre Trouble. It was published in this journal, the Electronic Book Review, but also published in a collection called First Person. And I believe this one has some responses attached to it. I'm trying to see if these are included on the website. It does not appear that is the case. But originally there were I'm trying to see. I wonder, what is this? I'm trying to see how their website matches the. I guess not. Okay. In the original publication of this book, it was interesting because you would, and I have a copy, but the way it was laid out in the original book is like you would read along the essay, Genre Trouble, and then running along the bottom of it, like the bottom fifth of the page, there was someone else's essay responding to it. And I want to say it was Janet Murray responding to Espen Arseth. And then at the end of her essay, there's another response from Espen Arseth responding to her. So it's this conversation built into the book. It's a really cool layout and an interesting idea. And you got to see these ideas really in contention with each other, which I thought was pretty cool. But here you just see it by itself. And hopefully, you can kind of imagine different responses. I think it's probably in here somewhere. I don't know how to navigate this structure on there. I was going to say new version of this website, but I think they've had this layout for 4 or 5 years now. The other reading is linked in here. Marie-Laure Ryan. Again, this is a book, an excerpt from a book called Avatars of Story. Yeah, Computer Games as Narrative. And in this book, Marie-Laure Ryan is laying out the implications of narrative and narrative theory in light of digital media. She talks about reality TV. She talks about alternate reality games. She talks about live TV broadcasting narrative, which I thought is an interesting chapter because she talks about how whenever sports commentators call a game, they're not just sort of denoting the action. They're not just reporting what happens. They're trying to tell a story about a comeback or somebody kind of achieving a redemption. Or they try to tell. They use storytelling basically to accomplish the communication of that game, and that's what makes a good broadcaster. But take a look. I think you'll probably be able to follow this pretty easily in terms of how it relates to other things that are going on. But take a look. It's like 20 pages, and I think fairly accessible. You'll also see references to things that I covered today and that we've covered elsewhere. So hopefully that will make sense. After you read both of these, then a couple of questions, kind of general impressions of either. But I'm also interested in hearing your thoughts about the strongest point for each side. Like, what is the most clear statement of the ludologist that makes the most sense to you, and the narratologist? Like, what is their kind of the big takeaway that you thought was important or valid? And then ultimately, what's the point? It doesn't matter. What is at stake here in these debates? And that's a little harder to assess unless you've read a lot more of it. But what are your thoughts? Like, what do you think is going on here? Why is it worth analyzing and debating, or why was it worth analyzing and debating this kind of thing 10, 15 years ago? I will say the field has moved on. I don't know if the debate was won or lost or just called off, but I think it's actually more accurate to say that it was never really that much of a debate. It was just people trying to carve out different starting points and different points of view in that kingdom that I showed you on that first or second slide. So anyway, I'm going to wrap it up soon, but I saw a question, so let me see. Yeah, Kelly had a question about the metagaming project. I would say don't. I mean, you can take a look at it, but it's not going to make a lot of sense until we can actually look at the article, like actually look at the stuff from metagaming. But basically, I'm asking you to design a game. And this is a hypothetical game, so you don't have to actually make it, and it doesn't have to be practical. But I think it would be easier to see if you look at examples of meta games, and I can show you those, and then that would help you kind of think of how you might do it. I mean, you can look at it if you want. It's due tomorrow, but I think it's, what's the classic meme? Due tomorrow, then that means due tomorrow. Like, I'll type it in here so you can see what I mean. That's that's what I mean. But yeah, and you can, like everything, I'm pretty, I'm open to suggestions and pretty flexible in terms of the details about what you actually produce. But essentially, you're trying to think of how would you turn what you've been playing into a metagame, and understanding how we get to metagaming is going to be helpful as you do that. So if it's not done tomorrow, like if it's not a big deal. Like if you need, so what is tomorrow, Wednesday? If you want to wait until Thursday to do it, doesn't matter to me. I'm not going to be able to grade it until Saturday at the earliest anyway. So that's fine. I'm not penalizing anybody. I know it's stressful to see those due dates come and go. I don't know any other way to do it other than just to say that it's, it's really not late if it's not done tomorrow. It just needs to, I can't just say, like, I found that with Canvas, if I don't put any due date on it, then some students will never see it at all and never do it at all. So I'm trying to make sure that it has at least a nominal due date to remind you to do it. But if you need a couple more days even, that's okay. Just bearing in mind that there's also the final project, which is could be related to it as well. So, we'll get there. I think I need to go see what's going on upstairs. But the book for this, by the way, and I mean, I guess I could do a quick intro of it, and that might be worth talking about, is this one. I need to this is probably a good time to double check my links to make sure these link to the right sections of this book, and too many tabs. So what we'll do is close tabs to the right. And let's see, make sure this link works. Okay, great. Yeah, so this is it. I mean, this is the beginning of the book. This is the right place to start. I'm going to probably assign just this introduction and probably the first chapter. That's probably it. Let me show you a couple of, maybe I can show you examples. I don't know if this one works from this link anymore. But what's cool about this book is that Patrick Lemieux and Stephanie Bollock designed several games to go along with it. And they've got a couple of them on itch. So these are actually the footnotes to the whole book, or the footnotes for the book are playable as a game. This is the Zelda one. Yeah, I might have to dig for the link to the other ones because I think the links that they include here no longer work. Yeah, so I don't know why, but maybe try this one. Yeah, okay, so not the Mac version. Okay, here we go. So this is actually a video of playthrough. So this is probably a good way to summarize it, because if you can't play it yourself, you can at least watch the video. But there are ways you can play it. This is it's called 99 Exercises in Play, and what they've done is they've taken the first level of Super Mario Brothers, as you see here, and each level, like each of the 99 exercises, is a different permutation of a constraint on the level. So as you can see now, instead of moving left to right, we're moving top to bottom, and now we're moving bottom to top. The levels are simple at first. I mean, the permutations are simple at first, and then they get weirder. They remain fairly playable for a while. It's just they kind of mess with your head a little bit. You can kind of see this here. There's not any audio coming out of that. Yeah, like this one. There's zoomed out, and then of course the next one is zoomed in. So this is an example of a metagame because it does something to the original game, and it has an argument. Now, to understand the purpose, you probably have to read the chapter that goes with it, and so it's not like a straightforward like satire. Like that's the thing about these metagames. These we can certainly imagine satirical game design or gameplay that. A game mechanic that is inverted or replaced somehow. Like for example, maybe this is a metagame, but I made a game many years ago where you play as a space invader, like you play as the invader coming down and then you get shot. And so it's an inversion of the core mechanic of the game, which is shooting something and then but I've taken away the shooting, and all that exists in the game is being shot instead of shooting. You can, yeah. I think this will make sense if I can do. I mean, this is I think you're all getting ahead a little bit, so this will make more sense, or maybe less sense, but you'll at least understand the context for it if once you read the chapter and once you read the metagaming stuff. So focus on the reading for today first, the Ludology versus Narratology stuff, because like that's how we get to metagaming. Like it's built in order that way on purpose. So we'll have a detour through the material turn, and then we'll take a look at metagaming tomorrow. And then the homework that I'll talk about in terms of that is the metagaming project. And just to be clear, you're not programming a game. I'm not asking you to actually make a game. If you want to, by all means, but really we're just thinking through the things that you would change about something in order to make it a metagame as opposed to a game. Like we need to understand and spend some time with the term metagame before kind of talking about how to make one. So let's wait and do that tomorrow, if that's all right. Because it's not what you might think. There is a term metagaming that you might know of, and that's usually a way people talk about like cheating, basically, like in the context, for example, of role-playing games or like tabletop role-playing games. Metagaming would be doing something out of character because you have some kind of personal agenda. That would be an example of metagaming, and that's not what we're talking about here. This is a much more literal sense of meta with respect to gaming. So yeah, take a look at it. Okay, so I'll wrap it up soon. I see a few people typing, so I'll wait for you to type just in case you're typing a question that I might be able to answer. But otherwise, let's put a pin on metagaming until tomorrow and focus on the reading journals for today, if that's all right. But yeah, I'll wait for, I think I saw Lotzi and somebody else typing. So, okay, you're welcome, Maddie. Just so loud. Can you all hear that? Like, can you all? It's like thunder. Like it's like elephants. I mean, I just have a little mic here, so maybe you can't pick it out. Okay, so you can. Good. All right. Great. All right, cool. Well, hopefully, it sounds like they've calmed down now that I'm wrapping up. Okay, cool. Well, thanks for watching, everyone. As always, I'll put these things up together in some in kind of an outline form in Canvas, and of course upload both videos to YouTube so you can view those later. Or if you are not watching live, then you probably are watching this later. Okay, so have a good afternoon, everyone. Let me know if you have any questions or issues with the readings. Otherwise, we'll talk about mainly metagaming tomorrow, I think. All right, see you later. Bye, everyone.